So, welcome to upcoming lead and copper rule and revisions and lead service line industries.
Inventories.
Thank you. Inventories. Good morning, everyone. I've had my coffee this morning. It is presented by the MassDEP Drinking Water Program and hosted by RCAP Solutions. RCAP Solutions is part of a nationwide network called RCAP, which stands for Rural Community Assistance Partnership. My name is Rebecca Novak, and I'll be your host. I'm in Massachusetts and work with the RCAP Solutions Network, or the purple states on the map there, all the New England states, New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. We're a nonprofit company providing technical assistance to rural communities and tribes with drinking water and wastewater issues. We also offer training sessions for water and wastewater operators, which are usually approved for credits. Today, we'll start with an introduction to the lead and copper rule revisions and lead service line inventory highlights. Then the City of Malden and the City of New Bedford will share their experiences, and we'll wrap up with the state revolving fund financing process. Our first presenter of the day is Michael Celona. Michael, take it away.
Thank you. Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Tuesday morning. My name is Michael Celona. I work in the DEP Drinking Water Program, and I'm going to be providing a little bit of an intro on lead and copper revisions as relates to lead service line inventories. We have a number of great speakers today, so I don't want to take up too much room. Just talking about some of the background information about the inventories. Let me see here. Oops, sorry. Yep. So the lead and copper rule revisions were released in January of this year and were subsequently put on hold. It was a fairly comprehensive reevaluation of the LCR, numbering several hundred pages. Had a number of pieces that touched upon just about every aspect of drinking water. It included, again, the piece that we're going to be talking about today, which is the lead service line inventories and replacements. There's also pieces on there on sampling protocols and monitoring plans, public notification and education, which is an aspect that I'm also involved with, data management and privacy requirements, lead in schools, which is another piece, a plug. We have a separate lead in schools and childcare facility program where we can offer free lead testing. There's a small system provisions to it, touches upon source treatment changes and source water monitoring, and corrosion control treatment, water quality parameters, and a find it and fix it approach to address issues as they are found. An overall arching goal of the lead and copper rule revisions is to better protect children and communities from the risks of lead exposure. The rule aims to do this by, again, addressing the issue of lead in schools and childcare facilities, overall getting the lead out of our drinking water, which has been an ongoing issue for decades, as well as empowering communities through information, putting information in their hands so that they can also be part of the process of addressing this kind of ongoing issue. There we go. The lead service line inventory is one major component in the one that we're discussing today. And this also really is about the public involvement piece of the lead and copper revisions. For the first time, EPA is going to require systems to develop a public lead service line inventory, including both the public and the private side, with a location identifier with regarding to the property. For those large systems, greater than 50,000 people, the inventory is going to be required to be placed online. So a customer, a resident, business owner can look online to determine whether or not the line leading into their residence or property contains lead, likely contains lead, or is unknown. In terms of what is to be included in the inventory, obviously, whether or not it's a known lead service line, Also, whether or not it's a galvanized line requiring replacement, including whether or not it's upstream or downstream of a known lead service line. For those lead service lines that are unknown, they need to be flagged, in addition to those that are non-lead service lines. So it's a full inventory of the service lines. Lead connectors, the old ones, the goosenecks and the pigtails, are recommended to be included in the inventory if records for those pieces exists. Importantly, the deadline, the water systems must prepare for an additional LSL inventory within 3 years. Now, after the new administration took over, they put the proposed, or what was at the time, the LCRR revisions on hold for a partial reevaluation. We have not seen any indication that the lead service line piece will be removed from the final version when it gets finalized I think by the end of the year. So at any rate, it's a good idea to start working on some of these components of the LCRR that are likely to remain in our good public education and public health practices regardless. How often should this inventory be updated? Annually or triennially if the system is on reduced monitoring. Ideally, it would be updated obviously as frequently as possible as new information comes in, but knowing that there's also going to be an online portion of this for larger systems, there can be some variations on that. Why are the lead service line inventories important? Again, one of the big things is it informs the community about a component of their drinking water infrastructure. It's important for them to be empowered to help make better decisions about the water that's being served to them. It also helps water systems to track their progress towards full lead service line replacement, which is the ultimate goal. In particular, should a water system exceed the existing lead action level or the new trigger level that's included in the LCRR. It also enables states and others to verify whether the tap monitoring samples are being collected from homes with service lines that are lead, unless they have none, as required by the new revised rule. So again, it's another way to collect important information. So as we look ahead for the next few years, putting together our lead service line inventories, there's several pieces to this, and some of this is what we will hear from our speakers today about finding and organizing the data that you have currently. If needed, create a survey for your customers to help identify lead service lines on the private side, those within the houses or businesses. Working with local community groups to create an outreach strategy for targeting households with unknown lead service line materials for them that it's not as apparent. And finally, making those inventories publicly available, ideally using mapping tools. Some of the systems that we'll hear from today have some of their information publicly available using maps, which is a really great way of engaging with the public and kind of meeting them where they are as they become more tech savvy and more used to getting information online. If you have additional questions, certainly give us an email or contact us. And that is it for the short intro. And we're going to move into our next speaker.
Morning, everybody. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. My name is Robert Orthman. I'm the Assistant General Counsel at the Boston Water and Sewer Commission. So I'm an attorney there. And just going to go through some of the work that we've been doing at the Commission regarding our lead service line inventories. So this is my quick biography. I won't spend too much time on this, but as I mentioned, I'm an attorney with the Commission. I've been there about 7 years at this point. Prior to that, I was an associate at a small law firm in Boston and an aide on the Boston City Council as well. So just some background as to the Commission's involvement at this. So in the large perspective, it's been Commission policy to remove any lead lines that have been found in the public way going back decades. Specifically in 2004, the Commission exceeded the lead action level. At that time, a robust lead inventory was created under the regulations existing at that time. Some of the things that were done, and I'll talk a little bit more about what we've done in recent times compared to this, were going back through some of the old records. Obviously, Boston's a very old city, so there are pipe records that go back into the 1800s. It's not unusual to find pipes in the system that date from 1860 and are still in fine working use. There was a substantial investigation, quite literally going card by card through the old system records to do the best that could be done to determine what was lead and what wasn't. From that, were extrapolated essentially a percentage of lead pipes that were found from the data. And then there were subsequent field excavations done as well in the public way over the course of a 3-year period to identify as many of the lead lines as possible. There was contractors were brought in to field investigations as well as replacements. Most of this work focused on the public way, as the requirements were at the time. The commission did create a program, an incentive program for private homeowners or private building owners that had a lead service pipe inside their building that connected from the main outside, and then was their responsibility from the property line inward to the foundation. The homeowners or property owners were credited with $1,000 over towards the cost of whatever it may have been to remove the line. That number was actually increased to $2,000 in 2016. The commission's had a very robust education program in the community since the beginning of this, with mailings frequently and bill inserts, with the advent of social media, through Facebook, Twitter, things of that nature, as well as working with existing community groups, neighborhood associations, elected officials to get the word out as much as possible about the, particularly from the private side, for folks to know that we will credit you some money to do this, because cost sometimes is a reason that folks don't move forward with it. And you can see on there that we moved over 1,000 lead lines on the public side from a 3-year period. There were additionally on the private side, I think close to 1,000 done as well. The commission tested out in 2007 based on the sampling results at the time. And so the commission was removed from the parameters of the overall program under DEP guidance, but the commission did continue to remove any lead lines that were found in the public way through construction or through identification, and maintained the program to incentivize and really try to compel private property owners to remove their lines as well. Harken forward 13 years to last year, the commission, again, there was an exceedance for the first time since the 2004 to 2007 period of the lead action level. 5 out of the 25 homes that were tested above the 15 parts per billion. With that trigger came the immediate steps that some here are probably familiar with in terms of the DEP regulations, but a particularly robust public education campaign, notification to all customers, as well as residents through the press, through the media, local news stations, the local newspapers, all picked up the press release, all picked up the information to get it out as widely as possible, to let folks know, to explain to them that what this meant, 5 out of 25, being clear about, what it meant about their private lines and what they could do to remove it. There's one of our brochures is on the slide to give a sense of kind of what customers were taking a look at. We also did pretty robust distribution to schools. Given that schools were closed due to COVID, we partnered with the Boston Public Schools to have that information included in the email distribution sent out to parents. I'm a parent of a Boston Public School child myself, so I was receiving those, and as well as with the COVID-19 mobile testing sites in the city of Boston, we were able to partner with the Boston Public Health Commission to have information provided to anybody that came to have a COVID test, and that dovetailed with our goal to reach particularly environmental justice communities where many of the COVID mobile sites were already located. And also a social media campaign was conducted as well. Specific to the purpose of this presentation, there were new inventory requirements. And as was mentioned by Michael regarding the lead and copper rule, a lot of the requirements that we've had to undertake would be those we would have to do once the EPA rule is in effect anyway. We essentially have done it on a much condensed timeline based on the lead action level exceedance. Of particular note is that unlike in 04 to 07, this time the requirements include the private side as well as the public side for inventorying, and then subsequently for removal as well. Identifying the known services and the unknown services, including them all in the total count, was different for us, and not being able to essentially extrapolate out the percentage of lead service lines based on, we found through our records that, in the prior period, it was around 13, 14% of the lines seemed to be lead, and we were able to extrapolate that as a number based on to essentially a target for removal. And this time we're not able to do that. So we essentially had to really go in and find quite literally every line we possibly can on the public and private side. Some of the challenges have been the accuracy and the maintenance of the records. Inside the commission, it's a large operation, and we have various departments that have had responsibility for lead removal through the years. So making sure that the information between our construction department, our operations department, our customer service database were all lined up was very much a data thing, and we were able to really coordinate across various departments to do so. Loss of institutional knowledge has been a challenge, where many of the folks that were in positions to deal with the lead exceedance in 04 to 07 have either retired or left and gone to other places. So some of that institutional knowledge was not there, and folks like myself, who was not at the commission during the prior period, took on this new responsibility and had to get up to speed very quickly on the requirements and so forth. And then just on the technological basis, the commission was operating on our legacy customer database system for many, many years. And a few years ago, we were able to do a substantial update to an entirely new customer database system. And in doing so, that has been wonderful in terms of managing our customer database, but as with anything technological, there was so much data carried over from one system to the other, and there was some data that was not carried over. And we discovered through the course of going through this with our IT folks that some of the data that didn't carry forward was some of the lead data. And that wasn't necessarily apparent early on, but we were able to work with our IT folks to find it. So what did we do? We created immediately essentially a lead action team of all the relevant internal department leaders and personnel that I mentioned before. We started meeting weekly, and by meeting I mean the Zoom meetings we've all come to know and love. So the remoteness of it, the remoteness of the work was a particular challenge. First and foremost, reviewing the materials from our prior exceedance. I realized that for systems on here, you probably may not have had an exceedance before, so you may be starting from scratch with your system. But I think it goes without saying that whatever data you have, whatever information you have, even from the age of your system, has to be the first step in terms of really going through and figuring out what you actually have on record before you even get out into the field. And then for us, we had to update those numbers, but given some of the things I described before about the inclusion of private services, having to discover the unknown services, I wouldn't say we were starting from scratch, but we had so many more data requirements on us that weren't present before and were never really collated before, that it was for those pieces of it, we were really were starting from scratch to some extent, quite candidly. We had never really tracked the private side information closely because there was no removal requirement. We had the incentive program I mentioned. We've been working with customers to remove them, but it was very much on a private property basis. We did find through the course of the mention going through the customer database system, there was some information in the old legacy database from when we were doing meter replacements. So anytime a commission employee or a contractor was inside a home doing a standard meter replacement, and we replaced all the meters in our system around 2004 to 5 with a more updated version, we had those individuals, those personnel, looking at the internal pipes to the meter to see, what is the pipe material. That was done as a best practice to just try to get a sense of things. It wasn't done because there was any requirement to remove them at the time. But by doing that, we did have some base level information for pretty much all the properties in the city. Given that it was from the period of 04 to 07, obviously we're now 13 years later, and some of that information has changed. If folks have changed their plumbing inside, if a private property owner removed their lead pipe, they wouldn't necessarily have had to inform the commission that they did so. If they took part in the incentive program, we would have known, but a lot of folks don't for whatever their reason may be. But we at least had some base level information to start from. And then we were going through all our old work orders. Basically, we had personnel just really doing yeoman's work to go through quite literally, property by property, work order by work order to find, do we have a record that these individuals contacted us about a lead pipe? Do we have any information from our personnel in the field that found there was a lead pipe? And that work is still ongoing, given that it's self-evidently, volumes and volumes of work. We have somewhere around 85,000, give or take, accounts in our system, given the size of the city of Austin. And then just lastly, just querying through kind of really every database system we had. We also, not in addition to work orders, we have site plan review for new development or for renovations to homes. And sometimes we have been able to capture lead information through that process. But because it wasn't a requirement under the prior iteration of the rule, that information was not necessarily carried over into a central database. And so we had our, and continue to have our folks that are plan reviewers and things of that get us that information to the best they have it to essentially bring it into the inventory pool. So that's a lot, obviously. The overall takeaway, I think it's probably obvious from what I'm saying. It's a time-intensive process. You know, we had to do this over the course of a handful of months in the middle of a once-in-a-century pandemic. We also had major technological issues that were unrelated to this that made it even more difficult. The good news for folks on this call is, you know, you have some time. You have a couple of years. But I strongly recommend beginning this process now, because I think to some extent you don't know what you have or don't have until you get into it. And then it does really require good coordination across departments. Even within your own specific agency, there are different people with different responsibilities, and just making sure everyone's on the same page and everyone's really focused on the goal here to move this lead piece forward. Some of our quick results, these are as of April 1st, so their numbers have slightly changed now, given that we're nearing the end of the month. But just a sense of what we found in our system. There's obviously, you know, quite a bit of pipe. I mean, a lot of that's unknown, and we have found, interestingly, that a lot of these, particularly on the private side, but a lot of the pipes that are listed are in lead in the system have been found in the field to not be. Somewhere around somewhere between 20 to 30% are actually lead, and that's decent. That's actually consistent with the records we had from the prior iteration of the program. Somewhere between 15 to 25%, give or take, are found to be lead, and that makes sense. Our records, I said, are old. The records in the private side were not necessarily required to be sent to us, as well as given that some of those records are from 04, 05, 15 years later, a lot has changed in the city of Boston, obviously. So we have found, just for example, through a query from March to April, just a shade under 1,000 lead pipes listed in the system were actually removed from the inventory because they were found to be in the field and or through comprehensive work order records to not be lead. And we have all the information and backup on that. So that's something I think that as you go through your inventory, you're probably going to be refining it as you go, particularly for the older municipalities that have older systems. We've been able to update DEP with that information as we go, and plan to update them again, particularly through the remainder of the year. And I think it's fair to say that as we continue to investigate in the field, we're finding that much smaller percentage of pipes to be lead than we may have had in our system, in our information, and that's obviously a good thing in terms of the public health of the city of Boston. It's a challenge to the extent that we have a lead service removal requirement, and when you find one that is listed as lead in your inventory initially, but then is found to not be lead in the field, while it's fantastic, it is not lead. You can't count that as a removal. You certainly can remove it from your inventory, but there is a little bit of a discrepancy there that we are continuing to move forward on. Just very briefly, this is our lead map. This is on our website. You could pull it up right now in real time and see. Every little dot on there you see that's an L is a known lead service pipe. That is on the private side. So we are frequently contacted by homeowners or property owners, particularly those who are looking to buy a property, either checking the map or calling our communications department asking, I want to buy 100 Center Street. It shows it as lead. Does it have lead? And as we say to folks, these are almost up-to-date records. They're fairly accurate, but as with anything, we encourage them to have the pipe checked itself, or we'll certainly send one of our people out to just confirm on site. But we do provide that to the public, and we have done so for a number of years. And the data is updated on a weekly basis based on whatever we're finding in the field, and as well as now that we've had this ramped up inventorying. So it's fairly up to date in real time. Just very lastly, some of the operational steps we've undertaken beyond the inventorying. The incentive I mentioned for private property owners has been increased to $4,000. So they get $4,000 back if they work with us to remove their line. We've been doing mailing and preparing a mailing to all customers with known or unknown private services. It's about 5,600. We've put out contracts for the removal of lead services in the public and private way. We've put out contracts for the investigation of lead services. That'll supplement existing personnel who obviously have other responsibilities just for the general maintenance of the overall water and sewer system. And then I think the biggest challenge operationally is the funding piece, and we're self-evidently, and there may be some federal money coming in on that, but we'll have to see. And then we've been working with the MWRA, considering some of the grants and loans they have available. So it's the financial piece, again, is something for I think systems to think about as you move forward in under the new APA rule. And that's it. That's a lot, but I'm happy to answer questions at the end, or my contact information is there, and I'm happy to provide any guidance to any folks that are starting this process as well. Thank you.
That's interesting. Well, good morning, everybody. Hopefully, if you're on, you're still on. So my name is Shawn Syde, and I'm here with Ymane Galotti. And today we are going to talk to you about the City of New Bedford's lead service line replacement program. And we're also going to focus on how we as a community were able to team, partner, and navigate the MassDEP SRF program requirements to implement the first phase of our program. Next slide, Ymane. So, as I mentioned, my name is Shawn Syde. I am the city engineer, and there's a nice bio about myself, but basically I'm responsible for the oversight and management of the city's capital improvements program, and I manage a staff of 13 folks here at the Department of Public Infrastructure.
And I am Ymane Galotti. I serve as the water superintendent for the City of New Bedford. I'm also a professional engineer and operator. My bio is right there as well, and primarily responsible for the treatment and distribution system, and I oversee a staff of 34. So in a brief overview of the city, it dates back to the late 1800s, similar to Boston. It currently includes approximately 300 miles of main, ranging in size from 4 to 48 inches in diameter. There are 4 primary interconnections that connect to our neighboring communities, and we have approximately 24,000 service connections. About 7,000 of those are lead service lines, which is approximately 29% of the system, and that's either full or partial. And basically, Shawn and I will be going over our lead service line replacement program, the implementation, the funding sources, and the lessons learned in this presentation. So you can see on the map, it's a pretty long system there. So one of the initial steps was, as previously discussed, to gain an inventory of our lead service lines. MassDEP asset management grant was utilized to do this, and we had tie cards, as you can see in the upper left-hand corner, that were then converted into an Excel file and then into GIS. And the way this was documented was to include the 3 portions of the lead service line, so the city-owned portion, the owner-owned portion, and whether or not both were lead or one of them was lead. So there were a few variables there. Phase 1 of the lead service line replacement program, which was funded through SRF funding, was basically differentiated, and we were able to select those areas based on the highest rate of children under the age of 18, the density of the lead services in the area, and another aspect to it was that we had to evenly divide the work amongst the 5 separate wards within the city. So we had several areas within the city that were targeted for the lead service line replacement. Within this program, we were paying for both, obviously, the city side as well as the owner side. And a little history is that we were similar to Boston under the requirement due to an action limit exceedance to replace 7% of our lead services starting in 1999. We then tested out of that and then again started back up in 2014. We have since tested out of that, but continue on with our very aggressive lead service line replacement program because it is one of the city's primary goals to remove all the lead services within the city. So despite our requirements, we're continuing to that phased approach in removing them all throughout the city. For our first phase, the original budget was $10.2 million. The post-bid cost was $9.56, and the final project cost was $10.17 million. So as you can see, there wasn't too much room between our original budget and our final project cost. The original project included approximately 1,200 lead services. which we were able to complete. But in addition to that, with some of the extra funding, we were able to complete additional work such as water main replacements, where we had issues with water mains that were extremely brittle and it was impacting the lead service renewals. So we were able to replace a few of those streets. Some of the other change orders included meter assembly replacements. That was a lesson learned as well to account for the fittings associated with replacing those meters. Sewer service relocations, where there were a lot of old sewer services in the same trenches as the water service lines, and as well as adjustments for the copper service, because actually in that situation, the copper services were overestimated in quantity. So to compensate for that cost, we had to make an adjustment. We found during construction, customer communication was key, of course. There were some people, surprisingly, that despite it being free, were not interested in the renewal. It wasn't too many, but there were still enough that it was noticed. The contractor, the way that we had it worked out was the contractor was responsible for sending 3 letters to the residents. If that didn't succeed, then DPI would call, and times if there was still no answer, then they would try knocking on the door. The contractor scheduled the pre-construction videos to confirm the service type and location and scheduled the renewal. That was very critical to the construction process, and sometimes our inventory was incorrect, so they were able to identify that at that point, whether or not it was actually a lead service. And then also for any complaints that were after construction, that was always a very good argument that we had to justify anything. And one other important aspect was that we created standardized responses for frequently asked questions from residents, especially people who were wondering why they weren't selected for a lead service line replacement. That was probably our most common question. So we made sure that all the staff up at the front end had, a pretty much scripted response, so that way it wasn't as much of an issue. Post-construction, we did make sure that all of the residents who did have a renewal were notified of the increase in lead after construction, and we instructed them how to reduce their risk of exposure. We offered lead sampling tests upon requests, but we actually found we didn't really have any requests for the sampling after the fact. Construction was able to be done over a 2-year period because they had multiple crews working, because it was spread out throughout the city. So there were different areas that were targeted. That was fairly critical in the timing of replacing those lead services. They also utilized the pipe pulling approach, which was important for reducing trench size, as well as, primarily reducing trench size and work. We found, the sewer laterals were an issue that kept rising up because often did share common trenches with the water services. So they either had to be relocated or there were often sewer repairs. And the way that we had it worked out was, so if it was properly marked out sewer lateral, then the contractor was responsible if any issues occurred. Otherwise, DPI would repair that sewer lateral if it was improperly marked out. And during this phase, DPI was responsible for the connection to the meter. That includes lifting it up out of the sump if it was submersed. This, we would recommend probably using a plumber for the next phase. That way we wouldn't be limited by city hours. And additionally, we would also account for additional copper piping to make sure there's enough to connect to that meter. Some of the key tools and methods during construction included the ability to remove and replace the existing tap in the same location on the live main. That was pretty critical, so we didn't have, Swiss cheese water mains. But that was a good skill that the contractor was able to bring to the table. And then obviously using the pipe pulling approach and the ProPress tool for connection to the meters also sped up the process for us. And then I will leave it to Shawn to give you a summary of the project.
So here's just a summary, some of the highlights of and stats from what we completed as part of the project. So as Ymane mentioned, we did about between 1,200 and 1,300 services consisting of fulls, partials on the public, and partials on the private. One of the things that you'll notice there is that we actually inspected over or about 1,600 services, and that really gets back to some of the inventory requirements, and we'll talk a little bit about that under the lessons learned and making sure that your data is up to date. The other key thing that we did that was really important as part of our project, we made sure that we wrote the contract documents that the contractor GPS located all of the corporations and the curb stops. So we had that information readily available and done at the end of the project, so we're able to directly transfer it back into our GIS system and our maintenance management system. So it reduced the amount of time in the office after the project. So a couple cool photos over there on the right-hand side showing the team working out in the field. And you can see the two different trenches adjacent to the house and in the street as they're pulling the services into the new meter. So navigating the DEP requirements. So our project went full circle. We started with a MassDEP, one of the original MassDEP asset management grants from way back in the day, right around 2014, where we went through and began to catalog and categorize all of our lead services. I think Ymane talked about how we broke them out as being 3 different parts, and all of that information was dumped into our asset management system. But even as you saw that, as we did that, there were still errors. So it's really, really important to make sure that you have a good database as you start to work on your lead service line replacement program. So the next phase that we went through, similar to you in your community as you apply for DEP funding, is to fill out what's called a project evaluation form, or a PEF. This was done in 2016. Luckily, we were selected for funding, and we moved into construction shortly thereafter. So as we went through and we started to implement the program, there was 3 areas that we really found that really put some constraints on our project. One was paving and sidewalk repairs. So DEP has payment limits that have been established within their policy memorandums. And what we found is, as we started to excavate all of these pits, when we were done, we were essentially going to have a Swiss cheese street with pits and oddly shaped trenches all over the place within roads. Some blocks could have 10, 20, 30 of these various trenches within them. And when you're done, that's not going to look good. So ultimately, the city ended up fronting some cash to clean up the trenches, square them off. In some instances, we ended up paving the whole street because they were just going to be Swiss cheese. So be mindful of that as you work through your program. On the private side lead replacements, because we were in the first round of funding, unfortunately, we did not receive any principal forgiveness for the private side funding. We ended up doing 600 private side services, which is a considerable amount. So hindsight being what it was, I wish we would have waited now, because that would have been forgiven under the new DEP principal forgiveness. And then secondly, water main replacements. So under the new requirements with MassDEP, those are now eligible for funding under lead service line replacement programs. Again, I wish we would have waited because, as Ymane mentioned, we did have a bunch of trouble connecting in new corporations into old brittle pipe. And the photo on the right definitely shows that. That's actually stamped 1875, 20 years after the Civil War. So it's going on 150 years old. So we had a bunch of issues, corporations just blowing out. We'd backfill, it would leak, have to go back, dig again, and dig again, and dig again. And ultimately, DEP was able to work with us and allow us to replace some of those mains that were in really, really tough shape. So one of the other issues that we had, or things to consider as you work through your program, is to check out the number of loans. So we asked for $10.2 million in the IUP. DEP ultimately gave us $5.1 million in the first year and $5.1 million in the second year. That's all well and good, except our contractor decided to spend more than $5.1 million in the first year, which created some issues in terms of cash flow and payment. So luckily, we were able to work with DEP and get that straightened out. But please be mindful, or you should be mindful of when you look in the IUP to see how much money MassDEP gives to you, work that out in terms of a cash flow. And it's totally out of your control. of course, because it's all based on contractor means and methods, but just be mindful and keep that communication line open with DEP on how much money you're spending. And one strong recommendation is be flexible in your amount that you have available. So aim high in your PEF, expect the unexpected that's coming up in terms of issues and unknowns. Luckily, we were able to do that, which allowed us to implement the water main replacements that we need to and address the complete project and still come in under budget as to what we had budgeted. And certainly be mindful of the AIS requirements. Next slide, Ymane. And I'm running up on my time here. I want to be mindful of that. Ymane did touch on a number of lessons learned. I just want to, again, focus on plan for the unexpected. We found so many things. You'd think it'd be easy to replace a 1-inch pipe 50 feet across the street or something. It really wasn't. Boulders and foundations and private side issues and public side issues with utilities all created complex issues for the contractor to complete the work. And make sure that you have a good database. Know what you have out there before you get started, which is why we went through the full life cycle of working on to update our database before we actually got started. We also tried to save some money by doing it with city crews with a plumber. Not a good idea. Night work, weekend work, keeping up with the contractor, trying to save a few bucks by not hiring a plumber. Nope, we won't be doing that again. So in the next round, we're definitely going to be hiring a plumber and putting that into the contract. And finally, pre-construction videos are so important. When you're working on private property, everybody's coming back to you trying to make a buck here and there on you broke this or this wasn't like this. Document everything before you get started. It's going to save you a bunch of headache on the back end. And again, keep that open line of communication with DEP. They really want to work with you. They worked with us to make this a successful project. I mean, it took us 5 or 6 years to get to the end point of just the first phase alone, and every step of the way they were there with us to navigate the process. So with that, thank you very much. Appreciate if you're still on and you managed to work through the technical difficulties. There's Ymane and I's contact information if you have any questions. Following the presentation, we'd be more than happy to help you out in any way we can.
Thanks, Shawn, Ymane. And everybody's contact information will be up again on the very last slide, so you don't have to hurry up and find a pen if you miss it. So our next presentation is from Robin McNamara. And don't forget to unmute, Robin.
Can you see my slides okay?
Yep, we can.
Okay, great. Good morning, everyone. My name is Robin McNamara, and I am the Deputy Director of the Division of Municipal Services at MassDEP. The division administers the State Revolving Fund in collaboration with the Massachusetts Clean Water Trust. The State Revolving Fund, or as it's commonly referred to, SRF, offers financing for clean water and drinking water infrastructure projects. Today, I will speak about the financing that's available specifically for the drinking water projects that address lead. The Drinking Water SRF offers loans with a 2% interest rate. Communities that have achieved the Housing Choice designation under the Commonwealth's Housing Choice Initiative are eligible for an interest rate reduction of 0.5%. Along with the loans, the MassDEP and the Clean Water Trust are administering an additional subsidy through the Lead Abatement Loan Forgiveness Program. This program, currently funded at $30 million, reduces a portion of the principal of an SRF loan for the eligible lead projects. And those projects include lead service line inventories, material surveys, mapping, corrosion control, and lead service line replacements. This funding is available through the 2023 SRF financing cycle for planning and construction projects. The deadline for spending these funds is September 2025. To compel full replacement of the lead service lines from the curb to the homeowner's water meter, the Trust also offers the incentivized lead service line replacement program. Beginning in 2019, Communities that appear in the drinking water intended use plan for the water main replacement or lead service line related projects can replace residential portions of the lead service lines at no additional cost to the community and at no cost to the homeowner. And this was what Shawn was referring to. This program works by increasing the principal amount of the loan while reducing the interest rate to keep the total cost of the loan the same. It's important that communities begin this SRF process soon so that they can tap into these funds and prepare for the requirements of the lead and copper rule revision. This slide illustrates the loan process timeline. The SRF application process can take up to 2 years from the project submittal to the disbursement of funds, depending upon the project and the borrower's readiness to proceed. The first step is to submit a project proposal, and this is done during the SRF project solicitation period. The next solicitation period opens July 1, and the deadline to submit a project evaluation form, or PEF, is August 20th, 2021. I'm going to move forward one slide for a moment and talk about that PEF a little bit more. Because the drinking water SRF has limited capacity, only priority projects receive financing. The PEF is the project proponent's opportunity to make a compelling case describing the nature of the problem and the effectiveness of the project in solving that problem. It's very important that the project proponents supply all of the information that's being asked so that the MassDEP reviewers have a complete picture of the problem and the project. Examples of what you might see in a construction PEF include the project schedule, estimated cost, the map, the discussion of the severity of the existing public health issues, the system's population, the population affected by the project, discussion of all the interactions between the regulatory bodies, list of enforcement orders, discussion of options, planning efforts performed, energy efficiency measures, technologies that might be introduced, and then any other documentation that supports the proposed project and how it addresses the problem. There is very detailed guidance that's available for applicants on the requirements of the PEF on mass.gov, and applicants are urged to read that very carefully and make a good case for themselves. So let's go back to the loan process. So once you have your project solicitation, they're ranked, evaluated, ranked, and then the results are published in the draft IUP. The draft IUP goes through a robust public review process, and then a final IUP is published in January. This final IUP identifies those projects that will be offered financing based upon their ranking and the availability of funds. If your project appears in the final IUP, local authorization must be obtained by June of the IUP year. A loan application will then be submitted by October, with a loan commitment following in December. From there, the project would go out to bid, various project documents submitted and approved, and then when MassDEP issues the authorization to award the contract, the project can begin. A significant benefit of participating in the SRF program, and Shawn had mentioned this, is that a MassDEP engineer is assigned to assist the borrowers from the beginning of the project right through completion. If you'd like more information on the SRF program or the Lead Abatement Loan Forgiveness Program, please feel free to reach out to me or check out the program's webpage on mass.gov. And this is the contact information slide that Rebecca referred to for all of your presenters today.
Thank you, Robin. A PDF of everyone's PowerPoint presentation will be included in the email, the follow-up email that you'll get tomorrow morning. And as soon as you, the follow-up email will also include an evaluation. We value everyone's feedback. It'll also be, the evaluation will pop up in its own browser window as soon as you exit, but not yet, as I think Michael probably has one more thing to say also.
Yeah, I just want to thank everyone for joining us. We don't have time for questions, but if you want to email us questions, more than happy to respond. There'll be some additional information, as we can all imagine, on the lead and copper revisions as time goes by, and we look forward to working with you. And I want to say a very special thank you to our presenters for spending their time and talents with us this morning.
Thanks, everyone.